And I think our first speaker today is Alex Ayon, and we'll send it to him.
Thanks, Sean. Let me just share my screen. Great. So thank you all for joining us at freeCodeCamp OK. My name is Alex Ayon, and I'm here to talk to you about basic data structures in both Python and JavaScript. So what is a data structure? A data structure is just a collection of values and the relationships those values have amongst each other in that collection. And it's also the functions and the operations that can be performed on that data structure. So what is a list? I think we're all familiar with lists. Throughout our lives, we've either made grocery lists or to-do lists. But a list is essentially just a sequence of related items or values. And they have a specific order in relation to other items in the list. So for example, you could have an item that is the first thing in the list, or an item that is the last thing in the list, or something in between. Usually we call that the nth thing when we want to not specify the index. Most lists in computer science are zero indexed, and what that means is that the first position is referred to by the index 0. So lists in Python can be created with the open and close bracket notation. Lists in Python can include any data type. You can have a string, a float, an integer, a dictionary. You can even add a function to a list. That's one of the things that make them really neat. You can access items by their index. Again, so if you want to access the first thing in the list, you would use open and close bracket notation with 0 as the index you specify. You can slice a list by providing the start and end index, and what that means and what it does is that it will provide you a smaller subset of your list. You can also pop items from a list by providing an index in Python, and this is a little bit different than the pop method in JavaScript, where it will only give you the item at the end of the list. You can also remove an item by value, and all lists in Python have a length, and you can obtain that length by using the global length function. So in the code snippet that I've provided here, the first line, I am creating a list by using the open and close bracket notation. Once I have a list, I can add items to that list using the append method. And here I'm adding the string apple, the float value 23.99, the integer 12, and a dictionary with a key of pair and a value of 2.99. So in line 8, I'm grabbing the first thing in that list by using the index 0. In line 9, I'm grabbing the last thing in that list by using a negative index, which is unique to Python, but it's really neat, something that JavaScript doesn't have. And then I can also grab a value in between. So between the first thing and the last thing, I used the index 1, and that grabbed the value 23.99. Line 12 shows a slice. I specify the index 1, 2, 3. It'll return a sublist from 1 in index 2, but it will not include the index 3. Line 13, I'm showing how to pop a value from the list, and in this case, I specify the index that I want to remove, and that was the index 0, which is the first item on the list, and so the apple string gets removed from the list and ends up in the pop variable. Line 14, I'm removing the value 12, and if there were other values of 12 in that list, it would only remove the first occurrence starting from 0 onward. So I only have one value here, so only one value gets removed. And lastly, after all these operations are performed in the list, I just ask, I use the length function to kind of to obtain the length or how many items are in that list. And in this case, after all those operations are done, you get the value 2 because there's only 2 things left in that list. So some things you can do with lists, you can sort them, you can reverse them, and apply some other functional programming functions. So Python has a unique function called sorted, which is in the global scope. So you don't need to import it or anything. It's already readily available for you to use. And lists themselves have methods attached to them, like reverse and sort. So if you have a list, for example, like on line 17 with these numbers, if you pass that list to the sorted function, what you'll get is a new list that has been sorted in numerical order. If you want to reverse the order of appearance of the items in your list, all you have to do is call the reverse method on that list. And what you will get is that the numbers list has reversed the order of appearance of all its elements. You can also sort the list in place by using the sort method. And map, filter, and reduce are not as common in Python anymore. They've been, I wouldn't say they've been superseded, but a lot more people are using list comprehensions instead, but they're still useful. And what a map is it allows, a map is a function, but it allows you to specify a function that will be applied to every value in your list and do something to it, and it will return a new list. So on line 21, I've supplied the map function, the anonymous function, they're called lambdas in Python, but I've specified that I want every number in that list multiplied by 2. And I've also supplied the list, and what comes back is a list where every value has been multiplied by 2. Filter kind of works the same way. You pass in a function that will act like a selection criteria. So in this case, I passed a function where I want all the numbers in the new list to be greater than 5. And so it'll go through every item in the original list called numbers, and it'll ask, are you greater than 5? Are you greater than 5? Are you greater than 5? And if it's not, it won't include them. Reduce is similar, but instead of returning a list, what it'll return will be a single number. So it'll also apply a function to every element in your list, but it'll have an additional variable that acts like an accumulator, and it will hold that number. So in a way, in this case, the anonymous function I passed is accumulating every value. So it's adding every value as it's inspecting each element in that list. And that's the same as using the global sum function in Python, which will also sum all the elements in that list. So lists in JavaScript are actually called arrays, but they have a very similar syntax as in Python. You also create them using open and close square bracket notation. Instead of using the append method in JavaScript, you use push. You can also include almost any data type in an array in JavaScript. You can also access them by index. If you notice on line 9, you don't have that nicety that Python provided where you could specify -1 and give you the last thing. You have to do a little bit of math to get the last item in that array, but it functions very similar to Python. You can also slice, just like in Python, except slicing is done through a method, but it returns the same slice as it would in Python. There's other methods, whereas in Python you could use pop and provide an index and pop any or remove any element from that list. And JavaScript is a bit different. You can remove things from the front of the list by using shift, or if you do use pop, it will only remove from the end of that list. You can create your own remove function by using splice, and that would remove the value 12 from your list, but it'll use the index. It's a bit different, but it works just like remove in Python. And you can also obtain the length of that list by just looking at the property off that list, which is called length. And after all those operations, the length of that list should be 2. So just like Python, arrays have a reverse function, which will also reverse the order of appearance of all your elements in that list. Arrays in JavaScript also have the sort method on them. And The only difference here is that Python will automatically sort a numerical list, but in JavaScript, in order to do that, you have to provide it a function that will compare values amongst each other. And so on line 20, I provided an anonymous function with two variables, A and B, and there's a little bit of math going on. B is being subtracted from A, and if the answer is positive, that means A is bigger than B, and so you'll be sorting your array in numerical order using that function. JavaScript also has map, filter, and reduce, and they work pretty much the same way that they do in Python. You can double the values in an array. You can filter out by the values in an array by only selecting values that are greater than 5, and you can accumulate values as well using the reduce function. So Python has another data structure called dictionaries. They consist of key and values. The key has to be immutable and unique, and all that means is that it can't be changed. So normal values like strings, integers, floats, they will all work as keys in Python. But the value that you specify could be anything, could even be a function. And what dictionaries do is they map or associate the key to a value. So in this case, on line 30, I have a dictionary called fruit, and I have a key called name that is associating name to apple. And I have another key called color that's associating that to the value red. And another key called price, which is associating it to a float value called, or that is of value 1.99. They use the curly bracket syntax, and you separate a key and a value by using the colon. And then to access the values, you can use square bracket notation, or in Python, there is a method on dictionaries called get, where you can specify the key and it will return you the value. There is no such thing as dictionaries in JavaScript. The closest thing is objects, but they work well enough to be able to make this analogy. As you can see, they also use curly bracket notation, and they separate the attribute and value with a colon. And to access them, these values, it'd be pretty much the same as you would in Python. So here's my contact info. I'm on Slack, Twitter, LinkedIn. If you have any questions about this presentation, please let me know. Reach out to me, and also reach out to the folks in freeCodeCamp. Okay, I'm sure we'd love to have and answer any of your questions. And I have a few links. I'm linking back to freecodecamp.org because they now have Python courses and along with their JavaScript courses. And if you go through them, they'll explain all these data structures and how to use them. I also want to point out that Fluent Python is a great resource to learn about Python. And I've included a Revelit link where I have all the Python code in it. Thanks.
Yeah, great job. If you wouldn't mind sharing some of this in the freeCodeCamp Slack channel, that'd be great.
Yeah.
We did have a question from
Oh,
Hong. You mentioned briefly on one of your slides lambdas in Python. I think it wasn't quite clear what exactly
yes,
that means.
right here.
So don't feel like don't feel like you have to go into too much detail, but could you talk a little bit about what that means?
Yeah. So lambdas in Python are an anonymous function. Usually in Python, you'll define a function using the keyword def and then give it a name, use open and close parentheses, and define all its parameters, and then the function body. A lambda in Python is pretty much, it has no name, right? So once you create it and you pass it into a method, you can't really get a reference back to that function. And the method body for a lambda is everything after the colon, and you can't have any like expressions like logic or flow control. So it's a very kind of pared down function. Um, it's used for like quick logic, and a lot of these comparisons I'm making here in this lines of code. Python has a module called operator, I think, that already includes a lot of those functions, so you don't even have to define them yourself. if you don't want to.
Okay. Any other questions for Alex while we've got him here? You can find him in Slack, and then remember that we're going to open this Google Meet call up to everyone after the talks are over. So I'm going to pause for just a second to see if any more questions come in. But here in a second, Alex will be done, and Lauren will be next. But yeah, share those links with us in the FreeCodeCamp Slack channel if you would.
Will do. Thanks.